Thanks, you all. I just want to welcome you. I am so thrilled that you are here and that you've come to hear about these two great films and filmmakers. Tonight's conversation will bring together two films that ask what happens when the systems we trust to protect, whether it's children or wildlife, become entangled in harm. And so I'm going to tell you about the films. I'm going to talk a lot, but it'll just be at the top, and then I'll get you to the filmmakers. The first film is Magic and Monsters. It uncovers the long-buried story of widespread sexual abuse at the Children's Theater Company. In the aftermath of litigation, 4 survivors attempt the unthinkable, working with the very institution that harmed them. The film explores trauma, moral accountability, and what it takes for an organization to move from denial toward genuine transparency and healing. And then the other film is Trade Secret. And Trade Secret follows 3 unlikely allies on a mission to protect polar bears from international commercial trade. The sanctioned sale, they filmed for over 6 years across 9 countries, and it exposes the sanctioned sale of hundreds of polar bears each year to reveal how even those entrusted to protect the species may be complicit in its exploitation. Both films confront institutions that would rather stay silent, exposing the human cost of that silence. Each filmmaker spent years uncovering conspiracies, looking for transparency, and all with the drive and the motivation of courage. And so they're not just taking action, but it's about how do you step forward even when fear or hesitation is present, when you're not sure what action to take, and when you're not sure that you want to, that the risk might be too high. How does one navigate the tension between caution and suppression? And what does it take to assume the immense responsibility of documentary filmmaking on such charged, high-stake issues? And so I'm going to introduce the filmmakers. We're joined by 2 of the filmmakers who are 4 people from both of the films who are working deep in those systems that shape our collective consciousness, where protection and power collide, and where the courage to tell the truth can change everything. So first, I'll bring you the director of Magic and Monsters, Nora Shapiro. Nora is an Emmy award-winning filmmaker who, prior to her filmmaking career, spent over a decade as a trial attorney. Her award-winning film, Time of Ilhan, about the political rise of the Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, premiered in the 2018 Tribeca Film Festival, and it remains available on multiple streaming platforms. That is a plug to go look for it. Nora's work is known for its emotional depth, nuanced ethical inquiry, and commitment to community-oriented and centered storytelling. And then joining Nora is the producer of Magic and Monsters, Elizabeth Larson. She's the film's producer and a journalist whose early reporting on sexual abuse was one of the first to break the story of Children's Theater Company. And it was pivotal in centering the voices of survivors and shaping the film's ethical approach. And so in addition to her work on the documentary, Elizabeth is a freelance writer and editor whose award-winning stories have appeared in publications like the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Mother Jones, and more. And then we have the director of Trade Secret, Abraham Jaffe. He has filmed for over 6 years across 9 countries. In 2000, Abraham founded Untitled Filmworks, a Sydney-based production company dedicated to producing films that make a positive impact on the world. Among those is the 2015 Tales by Light. It's a 6-part television series following the journeys of some of the world's greatest working photographers, and then Big Cat Tales, a 5-part series that follows the lives of lions, leopards, and cheetahs in Kenya's Masai Mara Reserve, both of which Abraham produced, directed, and filmed. And I believe it's still on, Tales by Light is still on Netflix as well, and I encourage you to check it out. And then joining Abraham is Kostas Christ. He's a New York Times contributing writer and former Nat Geo editor and columnist. Kostas' work focuses on the intersection of travel, conservation, and sustainability. He spent decades dedicated to finding answers to the question of how we can balance human interest with the moral duty to protect the natural world. And then Costas was inducted as a National Fellow of the Explorers Club in 2023, and his life's work has been featured in the film called The Last Tourist. And Costas is a co-founder of the Blue Climate Initiative. So please join us in a round of applause for thanking the filmmakers for sharing their work. And before we get started with the conversation, we're going to see a trailer for both films just to get you grounded in the work.
The largest children's theater in the world, it turns out, is in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area.
Children's theater was a national gem.
It was the most magical, unbelievable place where things happened that you could only see in fairy tales.
Now I look back at it and I'm horrified.
There was a bunch of exceedingly bright kids, and we're brought into this professional theater, and we are all told we are special.
Arts courses, singing, acting, dance.
We are about creating sacred moments and magic.
Part of what made it so special is John Clark Donahue.
He was teaching us always, introducing us to art. Our minds were being expanded.
And then
I sensed this erratic energy for danger.
I heard the rumors about John Donahue.
little nymphs of the aisles.
The Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension investigated complaints that students were being sexually abused.
Our love of that art is what kept us there.
You know, people started telling their stories, and it was just this like, oh my God, I had no idea.
You were looking at a tip of the iceberg.
Wealthy, influential people of positions were very reluctant that this investigation would go forward.
Denial is such an easy thing to choose.
There are indications that other staff members may have been sexually abusing children over a period of many years.
They didn't want to believe that this was many perpetrators, many victims.
I had told the truth. It cost me everything that was important to me.
Sing to me.
The things that happened in that room.
It was shocking.
Institutions make themselves complicit in the hope that these problems will go away, that these memories will go away, that this history will go away. It's a second wound.
The average victim needs decades to come forward. You have to be an adult to understand that your childhood was destroyed.
It could have been safe, and it should have been safe.
Survivors come forward because they want children protected, and they want institutions to change.
That everybody knew this was happening at the theater. Nobody did anything.
Whether you're 5 years old or 50 years old, the polar bear is the most beloved, iconic species.
So how many polar bears we got?
We probably have 300 to 400 of them.
300 to 400 polar bears in stock.
Yes.
Scientists have described this as a ticking time bomb for the 26,000 remaining polar bears.
To see this majestic, iconic animal being reduced to a commercial product, you know, is this what we're about?
In the last 50 years, we have lost 70% of the world's wildlife. And yet, with this catastrophic decline, nobody really knows what's going on in terms of the commercialization of these species.
These are the biggest polar bears you ever find. Nobody knows that we're doing this.
The results are in.
This story needs to be told.
Norway has this dark secret. That's illegal trafficking right there.
Let's rather speculate in trading gold or diamonds, not endangered species.
There's a dark secret in the conservation world that needs to be exposed. We haven't told the full story.
So this conversation is really very heavily framed around the risk, around the retaliation, around the things that the filmmakers faced as they were uncovering stories, uncovering secrets inside of those stories that folks in the community and other folks might not have wanted revealed. And so I really want to focus on that. And so part of the conversation would normally be about how beautiful Abraham's footage is, which is really gorgeous, and the cinematography. And if we get to it, we get to it. But I just want to say that the details of the stories we will touch on, but we really want to, I'm really fascinated with, and I'm sure you all are too, as journalists and as filmmakers, about how they navigated what could be really a treacherous process and how they did it so beautifully and skillfully. So I'm going to start with an icebreaker for each of you. Can each of you briefly share a moment when you faced the most memorable risk, resistance, repercussions for confronting pervasive and protected expectations that are explored in your film?
Me first?
Feel free.
Okay. So I'll try to do this succinctly. And it's not a pretty story. This is actually well after the film was finished, but I think it says a lot. We premiered the film last April. We are just now newly out on the festival circuit. And by the way, thank you to Double Exposure. This is an extraordinary honor and an extraordinary organization, and we couldn't be more honored or thrilled to be part of it. But when we had we made a decision to have a hometown premiere in the Twin Cities at the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Film Festival. I'm naming it out loud. And the festival had actually courted me for the film. They've shown all my previous films, et cetera. And this is a story that went back decades, and you saw in the trailer, was known, if you wanted to know it. And we had been officially, formally invited with all the bells and whistles, et cetera, et cetera. And then I received a very obscure, kind of ominous email. And the long story short was I was summoned in to the film festival's office. And when I pushed back a little to inquire, eventually it came out that one of their board members had been approached by a board member of the theater. And now, all of a sudden, they wanted their board of the film festival to watch the film and decide if it was still going to be invited to the festival. And anybody that's a filmmaker, I don't think I have to say more about the ramifications. We refused. Ultimately, the film still was in the festival, and the reason we decided to do that was because we decided it was more important for the subjects in the film to have that premiere in their hometown, which they had already been told about. But that was shocking and revealing of so much of what we had experienced, and Elizabeth kept saying it, this was life imitating art. So there it is.
As it does. I have so many thoughts and follow-up questions, but we're going to leave it as a cliffhanger. Yeah. And in the Q&A, you guys can ask those questions of follow-ups. Go ahead, Elizabeth. Let's hear from you.
So in 2018, I wrote a 7,000-word story that was sort of the lead-in to working on this film. And I interviewed 39 people for the story, a lot of them off the record, a lot of them on background. Some brought support people with them. Some wanted me to meet them out in the suburbs where no one could see us talking because the perpetrator I was writing about had a history of being very vindictive, and they were scared. But what surprised me more were the 21 other people that I called, emailed repeatedly who wouldn't talk to me, wouldn't even say no, wouldn't engage. And those people, not every single one of them, but if I had to break it down into categories, I'd say those people were people of means and people of influence in the Twin Cities who would normally be on boards, and I probably was contacting them because they were on related boards and could have spoken to how much people knew in the day. And so I had to kind of overcome this. I'm a bad reporter. I can't break through to these people until I had this moment where I said, oh no, the silence is a story. It was a really big part of what's going on in this dynamic in our community.
First of all, just want to echo what's been said already, that just very, very honoured to be part of this festival. Thank you to Di and the Investigative Film Festival, Double Exposure. Just very, very special event that needs to be continued, particularly. I mean, none of us probably like following Eugene's talk. He was so brilliant. Set the bar high. But yes, I mean, this, as Jackie mentioned, this was a 7-year project. We never expected it. I'm not particularly proud that it took 7 years to 6 years of filming and then about a year in the edit, but that's what it ended up being. I hope the film is stronger for it. I first saw polar bears in 2012. Like, if anyone's been lucky enough to see them in the wild, it's an incredible experience. But it was the very first trip in 2012 that I found out that there is a legal trade. If I wanted to, if I have enough money, $50,000, I could go shoot one myself. There's trophy hunting, there's international trade. And I thought, how do I not know of this? I'm someone who worked in wildlife conservation films for a long time, and it was just a fact that I didn't know. So I immediately thought, gosh, there's got to be a story in this. It took a few years later before we began the journey. And I guess on the panel today, Kostas and I are going to try not to give anything away, because I don't believe anyone in the room, maybe Jackie and Diana might be the only ones that have seen it. It is screening tomorrow at 2 o'clock. So we don't want to spoil the film at all, but we can still talk about a lot of the themes on the panel's about. But I think it became an investigative film. I didn't actually didn't think it would go where it went. The revelations that we uncovered over these years through our protagonists, people that we met that were naturally following this story. Also, it began with journalism. It became following a journalist, and the story became a lot darker, and again, no spoilers at the moment, but we had to continue to document what we were uncovering. And I mean, I've sat on a couple of panels in the last few weeks with some people who work in real war zones and real life and death situations. I mean, we were lucky enough not to be in those type of situations of fear for life, but certainly very uncomfortable and, threats of sort of in other more mundane ways, but we had to continue on the journey. So yeah, I'm going to try to talk about the film as much as I can today without giving away.
That's okay. I won't let you. Go ahead, Kostas.
Thank you for being here. Thank you to everybody sitting in this room who took the time to come and be present for our discussion this morning. I think I'm just going to give a quick example as an icebreaker in the context of writing about subjects that may push against a popular narrative and what happens there. But I'll give you one example. I began doing an investigative story on the cruise ship industry some years ago for National Geographic. And in the course of that, one stellar cruise company that was positioning itself as a leader in conservation and restoration of marine habitats was uncovered as having actually blown a hole a quarter-mile wide through the last intact coral reef in the country of Jamaica, the island of Jamaica, and then went out on a public relations campaign to people who are, wanting to go on cruises and be responsible and have good vacations, telling them how their participation in going with them on cruise was helping to fund the restoration of coral reefs. So in this case, we had a situation where a company literally blew a hole and then celebrated that they were out there saving coral reefs from the very damage they had just done. The only reason I say that to you is because it led to a mounting pressure campaign that eventually got me marched out of an office, not from National Geographic, through board members, through excessive pressure, fired, cut off from email access in a matter of just hours. So that was, an example. And in the case of trade secret, you asked the question, and I would just say this. We're now in that moment. Abraham has mentioned to you that, we don't want to give away a sense, and we heard an earlier discussion from the filmmaker on, who was speaking before us, saying, you want to keep the audience engaged, you don't want to give them everything. But in the course of looking at this, a journey of trying to understand climate change's impact on one of the last most amazing iconic species in the world, the polar bears, we suddenly found ourselves confronting what should have been allies, but engaged in, as he mentioned, a dark secret. And so that pressure campaign right now is live with me. I've been getting calls. People won't go on the record. I've been told to pull back. I've been told my credibility is at stake. So here we are again in that moment.
Thank you for that, you all. I'm curious about how many of you who have been thinking about the challenges that you're facing as you listen to that or find them familiar. The beauty of this panel is that, yes.
I'm also interested in the challenge of working with people and also get your participants who also are facing the same pressure and what kinds of protections they want.
Perfect. Perfect. We're going to make mental notes of that. If it doesn't come up naturally in the conversation, and we don't get to it, definitely bring it back up in the Q&A. I just want to talk with you about, I wanted you to have a sense about the scope of the filmmaking that these folks have been doing. And now I want to give you a sense of the process. And so from moving forward, we'll have a discussion with each of the film teams separately. We'll start with Magic and Monsters and then move to Trade Secret. Along the way, they will hopefully address some of the challenges that they just brought up. But if they don't, again, please stay for the end for the Q&A because we want to hear from you as well. So I'm going to start with Nora, with Magic and Monsters. Your film contrasts institutional betrayal with institutional courage. What did those concepts come to mean to you as you watched the theater, the survivors, and the organization reckon with, and sometimes fail to reckon with, their past?
Thank you for that question. And Patricia, I'll try to weave in an answer to your question too in this. So where to start? I'll start sideways, which is I noticed yesterday morning when I was listening to the panels, I started counting the number of times the word bravery or brave or courage was coming up in the various panels, which was a lot, which made me know, if I didn't already, that I was in the right place. In my previous life, I was a public defender, as you mentioned. I'm kind of not, just by nature, afraid of conflict or a fight. I thought I had some idea, in part because of Elizabeth's amazing reporting, and just by being there in that town, I thought I knew what this story was. And, there was a mention in the trailer, it was just the tip of the iceberg. One of the things we did at the outset, recognizing some of the things that you bring up, Patricia, is we went to the Dart Center and got ourselves some training and some base in how to ethically navigate and provide the supports to the subjects in the film who were in the midst of full-blown trauma at the point that I came in and began the film. Renewed trauma in many ways because although what had happened to them had happened decades earlier, it was all brought back up freshly because this was all through the lens of litigation, through a look-back window that enabled them to bring these lawsuits through which the story is told. The part, we thought and hoped literally to the end and past the end that we were going to see courage revealed. The courage was clear, and the bravery and the stakes on the part of this subgroup. 17 former students brought lawsuits. This is 17 out of many, 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 many more. Depends on who you ask. But we know there are many, many, many more. So their bravery and their courage, I think, was very clear from the outset. Of that group, a small subset decided to go on this journey of this project, of this film with us. What I did not expect to see, and maybe I'm naive despite everything, all the experience I've had, was the lack of courage, the cowardice, not only on the part of the institution, but the surrounding community, and understanding the power structures and systems that allow this kind of thing to happen. And we all know, I mean, you can't open a newspaper without this happens. It happens in the Catholic Church, it happens in Boy Scouts, it happens in USA Skating, it happens in sports. This story hasn't been told before in the theater setting, and I think it has particular dynamics. But there are commonalities in all of those that I think are important things for us to take notice of, and is what I think of when I think of the question that you asked me. I hope that addressed your question.
You did. You addressed
Okay.
mine and Pat's. Which
Okay.
I don't want to speak for you, Pat. Was there any other aspect? Great.
And I can talk more about that later, but just try to not take up too much time.
No, you were perfect. Elizabeth, tell me about, you broke the story. You can clarify whether it was first or early, but I know it was at least very early, and at a time when if you think that Nora faced resistance, imagine long before Nora and a crew got there and people were even having conversations about the abuse, Elizabeth was doing reporting on this subject. So it had to have been, I'd love to hear about the degree to which you faced resistance, pushback, and then talk to me about how you navigated that. What was your approach?
Thanks for the great question. So I didn't break the story. The story was very, had been reported at the time that the artistic director of the theater had gone to prison in I think 1984. This was local and national news. I did, in the course of the reporting, I certainly uncovered a lot that hadn't been known and had new ground. But I was fortunate that the story that I wrote, which was really a reflection on this one perpetrator had been fired by the theater and went on to have a very, very successful restaurant career. And I'm not going to spoil what he did later, but he made a lot of money. And the question was really, it was for Minneapolis St. Paul Magazine, which normally specializes in great foliage walks. It's a booster publication, but the story was the editor's idea, and he and I both had come up in our careers through the alternative press and the alt weeklies, and so we had a click and a sensibility understanding, and he protected my reporting and the story the whole way, even though the magazine was very nervous. The theater was one of their advertisers. They had to navigate that, but I did feel a lot of support from them. Where I got pushback that was really hard was I was always interested in the current day management of this theater. None of them were abusers. None of them had been responsible for anything that had happened, and in fact had put in place great child safety policies. And the question I always wanted to ask after my story was done, the one that still stuck with me, was what role does an organization that has a history of harm owe to its survivors and its community? And after the story was published, and when Nora was just at the tip of starting to talk to some of our participants, I was absolutely persona non grata with the theater. We kind of had to, we didn't highlight my participation at first, but they had held a community meeting that they wanted as some way to kind of support their staff, and it was facilitated by RAIN, which is a sex assault and abuse advocacy organization. And I asked to come. It was open to the public. And they told me that I could, but they sent me an email and said, you can't write about it because we want to be mindful of the people's privacy. And my response, I emailed them back and said, that's fantastic. Of course, I would never write about it. Because I was like, they're doing it right. This is great. And I get there, and I'm about to take my seat, and I see one of my colleagues from my local newspaper, the Star Tribune, being ushered around by the theater's comm person to meet the artistic director and the director, and she wrote a story about it the next day. So what they had just done was cuff me, and that was the first time where I all of a sudden was like, I'm still really interested in this question, but I've gone from having more benevolent feelings about the theater and the organization to less rosy glow here. So does that?
Yeah, totally. Thank you. And it ties into my question for Nora about, what's rarely seen is survivors working with the people that harm them. And there are many things that you did beautifully. One is the sensitivity that you gave to the topic and to the participants that you filmed with. But to see survivors working with the people that harm them really genuinely and sincerely was really... It just really kind of flipped things for me in my mind about what justice and restorative justice in particular can look like. I'm curious about what might have been tricky in navigating the desire for the organization, for the CTC, to either have the appearance of change or to genuinely seek redemption.
That's a great question. It was tricky for a number of reasons. My aesthetic sensibility, who I am, was formed by growing up attending this theater. I loved this place. I later sent my own child to be a child actor there. I didn't send him. He found auditions and demanded a ride, but I allowed it.
You dropped him off.
Yeah, and did a lot of driving. After I verified that there were child safety policies in place, and per the earlier conversation, I have my own guilt, and as a motivator about questions that I didn't ask about who else was hurt and what else and what did that mean and what were the ramifications of sending my kid to an institution where this had happened and it hadn't been fully accounted for or reconciled. And I think that was a subcurrent for me all the way through. And so I loved it because I had this attachment through my own kids' experience, and it was a truly remarkable in the world. I mean, I'm not overemphasizing this. This is why D.A. Pennebaker did a film about this. This is why it was on the, you don't have to take our word from the provinces. Like, this was world-renowned art that ripples forward in the theater world to this day. So a huge part of me wanted a happy ending and wanted them to do the right thing and wanted these incredibly brave and really harmed survivors to get this thing that the fact that they were willing to go through litigation, which is bruising and brutal, and then say, we want more, and we want to work with you to help get you to this place of real justice. So this part of me desperately wanted the theater to come along and to have that ending where they got to be part of the solution and kumbaya and everybody gets to feel more healed. The way we managed dealing with that, navigating that, is just going back to like really strict by the book reporting and holding ourselves accountable, both to not burning the house down, not vilifying, continuing. I met with them at the very beginning because I had a personal in through my son, and had a meeting at which one of the people in charge said, "This is the worst thing that's ever happened to us," meaning the film. And another one said, "Maybe it's an opportunity." So I kept holding on to that there was this possibility, this crack of light. And then we were ghosted. But we kept literally throughout all the years of making it, all the way to the end, hoping that there would be a shift. And do you know what? Maybe that still will happen. Maybe this is the beginning and there will be ripples. But it was painful to navigate that.
Yeah, I have a follow-up to that. I'm curious about how much of that you're still holding, and what do you do with it, and how do you continue to do the work that you're doing, particularly around this project, holding that?
Yeah, if I'm honest, I'm holding a lot of it. It's still really, really fresh. I have a lot of feelings, a lot of intense feelings. So back to the Dart Center thing, one of the things that we dealt with not only was how do we show up for our subjects. For people who don't know, the Dart Center, which now used to be affiliated with Columbia and now has spun off into its own independent organization, works with journalists and reporters and filmmakers on how to responsibly be trauma-informed when you are dealing with subjects who have been through trauma and telling their stories ethically. Also, how do you take care of yourselves, the film team? We talked about this idea of secondary trauma, and I thought, oh, I'm immune to that. I was a public defender. Like, my rest of my team, I have to take care of them. But, like, I'm fine. And I don't think that's true. I think that, I may have a different answer in a year from now. I'm angry. I'm really disappointed in not just the institution, this beloved institution that I do not believe has fully reckoned with this, but with the community. And not just the community in the Twin Cities, but the theater community at large. There are people affiliated who are alumni of this theater who, let's just say, are in extraordinarily high places, whether celebrity or running other theaters, et cetera, who refused to be part of this, and therefore are not being part of ending the gaslighting and taking this out of the shame. And nobody's saying, as Elizabeth said, that the people running this institution now are responsible. But what is their responsibility? If we don't talk about this, it'll keep happening. And also, last thing, is that I think there's a responsibility, and I have big feelings about this, just statistically, on the part of a theater that has this in its bones, in its lineage, when they have children, hundreds, thousands of children coming to their shows annually. Statistically, the number of kids sitting in their audiences that either have been, will be, or actively are being abused, not by that theater, but that it's happening, I believe they have a responsibility to address this, and they're not. And I'm deeply disappointed in that. So.
Yeah, you touched a bit upon the scope of the abuse. I know it's hard to know until you see the film, but it's staggering. And there were so many times as I watched it that I was shocked and then shocked again. And so it really is, I can understand the level of anger at the denial, and also just, people just sweeping it on the rug and continuing to laud the theater when there are things that they have to answer for and acknowledge. Thank you for that, Nora. Elizabeth, tell me what you learned about the limits of, or the possibilities of institutional courage, the limits to their ability to be courageous around truth-telling as a form of collaboration with those who were complicit.
Thanks. As an add-on to what Nora was talking about, because this is a group of professionals and we're talking about how to work in these things, I do want to mention, after my story, I did have to get professional help because I did develop secondary trauma, and we really were very, part of the training was about how to take care of it. It's very real. It's very real when you're dealing with such tough stuff, especially when it's happening to children. So your question was about institutional courage and the limits of it, or?
And when you're working with people who are complicit.
Well, I think one of the things that I think that a lot of, especially organizations, fall back on with is that they're protecting themselves from legal liability. And I understand that, and I understand that if you're an arts organization and your board is made of a bunch of white shoe lawyers and they want to protect your brand, that's an understandable impulse. However, when we're dealing with these kind of issues, there has to be a more creative solution. There has to be a way to get through that barrier to come up with something more healing. And in the case of our film, we present these ideas to aspire to that we don't get to see in action. So.
Yeah, there's a level of explicit just calling to account.
Yeah.
And really giving grace about what the institution could do to remedy things or to at least mitigate the harm. And so they weren't without ideas about what would be meaningful to the survivors. And that's because of the survivors' bravery that they were willing to confront.
They're really incredible.
Yeah, it is extraordinary. Well, thank you all for that.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. We're going to move now to Trade Secret. And my first question is for Abraham. You began making Trade Secret. When did you realize that the problem went beyond poaching or beyond the skin trade, actually, and included those meant to protect the species? What was your initial response to what must have been, at some point, an unexpected sense of the scope of the story?
Yeah, thank you. And actually, as I was sitting here listening to you both talk about your film, and what's worth acknowledging, we both have not seen each other's films yet, but there's a lot of things that you've said just now that resonate, I'm sure with Kostas as well too, about not burning down the house. We want, I'm speaking for you now, but we want our film to be a catalyst for change, good change, but serious dialogue around these really important issues. Very different issues these two films tackle, but the loss of biodiversity, the loss of species, the fact that 70% of the world's, we've lost 70% of the world's wildlife in the last 50 years is a staggering fact. That 1 million species are on the brink of extinction. This is the reality of the world we live in, and yet we still exploit species like the polar bear, and like Adam Cruz says in the film, gosh, if we can't protect the polar bear, one of the most beloved animals, one of the most well-known animals in the world, what chances have all these other creatures got, the smaller unknown animals? I said in my opening chat, the fact that polar bears were traded and trophy hunted was enough for me to start following a story, and for the first year or two it was just little shoots where I could in between other projects I had on, producer funded, before we actually did secure some funding, so we did little shoots here and there, never knowing where this story would take us. And I think if anyone who spends enough time on a subject, documentaries usually take time, several years sometimes, even longer, you do become a bit of an expert on the subject naturally, because you've got to have curiosity, deep curiosity, and seeking the truth and seeking the facts, and you do become a bit of an expert. And I went into this really, looking back, super naive. I mean, one fact which I've mentioned actually recently is we shot, I think, 240 interviews for the film. There's very few talking heads in the film. It's not a talking heads film, but they were sort of research with a camera, and much of that testimony informed us on avenues to explore and go down different, rabbit holes. And so that was hugely important to our process. And I mean, you talked about, Jackie's things that were unknown. There's a thing called CITES, and I'm not sure if many of you know of CITES. It's the Convention on the International Trade in Endangered Species. It's a little bit like the United Nations for wildlife. Every 3 years they have their big COP, and there's one coming up actually in a few weeks. So they're every 3 years, and 184 countries, almost every country in the world is a participant. It's been around for about 50 years. And I went to this summit, the first one in 2019, thinking, naively, that it was a conservation summit, that it was a place where countries came together to protect species. But I quickly realised it was a trade summit. I mean, almost everyone I met there in suits from different countries around the world were there with trade as the sort of forefront of their mission, which was very surprising. Yes, there were some conservation groups thrown in the mix as well, but it was primarily trade, and that was a huge eye-opener for me. And that's when I first realised in 2019, okay, and started to learn about why polar bears aren't protected, what had happened in the past. There had been attempts to protect polar bears. Why did it fail? Who was behind this? What all countries, organisations, what political forces were at play? And so it became so much more interesting, and I was hooked at that point. And then stumbled across people who were equally committed to this story, and that's sort of how the whole thing began. But yeah, there was constant revelations. And one thing about the film is that it's not the usual bad actors. I think if you go into watching a film about wildlife or trade, I mean, China does get a bad rap in a lot of documentaries in the past with ivory and rhino horn. And yes, we do some filming in China. To the lady's question who asked earlier about, duty of care, we took a lot of steps on that particular shoot for the undercover operatives that did the button cam work in China to sort of make sure their identities were protected, because they live there and it's not something you want to be doing in China. And for me, in terms of as the story developed, and again, no spoilers, as we realised, gosh, we are really confronting some pretty uncomfortable realities here. How far are we going to go with it? It was the protagonists in the film, their courage to keep going with the story, and they're the ones on screen. I mean, I'm a bit of an invisible man, even though my name's on the film, and I guess the courage for me and the film team, all of us involved in the film, is probably more on the release of the film now. That's where you really have to step up and say, here it is, But so I'm in awe of the protagonists, the people that were actually there, often uncredited cameramen, really, with button cams at times, filming the scenes that were only accessible covertly, and that sort of gave us the courage to keep going. And at this point, the thing that does give me confidence moving forward is the fact that we have had so much due diligence, self-imposed due diligence on getting it right. We knew how explosive some of the revelations are, and we also didn't need to make it any more sensational than it is. It was an exercise in restraint, if anything. I mean, if you start over sensationalizing or taking it further, I think that would diminish the journalistic integrity of the film. And we knew the scrutiny that the film will come under. So we had 3 legal audits from 3 separate law firms, international, different countries, to make sure that we'd crossed every T, dotted every I. And we still know going forward, that doesn't mean that you can't get pushback and things can't happen, but at least we know what we're putting out in the world is the truth, is what happened, is what's happening, and in fact, so much more that you can never put everything into a story. You've got to be selective. And actually, talking about from a filmmaker's point of view, we all know, any filmmaker in the room here knows how much power you have in the edit. You really need to be very careful how you wield that power. You can, like Eugene said, you can cut a sentence off. You can present things in different ways. But I think if you you have to have a centered sort of philosophy moving forward, I think, and going, I'm going to not wield that power for evil and present the truth. And that's, you know, that's the power you have as a filmmaker. And it goes not just in the edit, it's in every choice you make. I mean, every choice of where you put a camera, how you cover something. That's why moving forward, I'm prepared. We're prepared for whatever happens, knowing that we've done everything we can to do it right.
I can't wait to be there for the screening. Thank you for that, Abraham. I want to ask you, Kostas, as someone who's spent decades in the field, tracking the issues that are in the film, including skin trade, talk to me about how you found yourself shaping Abraham's understanding of the systemic issues.
Well, first of all, again, thank you. And what really strikes me here is how two topics, two films on two very, very different things bear some tremendous parallels in the issues that they confronted. To your question, Abraham certainly knew what was at stake. I think, like him, when you see the film, which will screen tomorrow, or is it Saturday? Yeah, it is tomorrow. You will see the real heroes, the folks who put themselves on the line, who went undercover, who were frightened and worried. And when you see that kind of courage, we feel that we owe ourselves to give them that support and that justice. In my case here, in terms of, you say shaping Abraham's understanding, he's got a tremendous knowledge of nature and extinctions. But what I would say is this: the goal of this film was never about exposing a well-known and in many respects beloved institution in the world of wildlife conservation, because it wasn't in the editorial. We weren't there. It was discovered along the way. And so when you encounter that, you encounter all sorts of things. You encounter pushback. As I explained to Abraham, and we've discussed this, the goal is to protect an iconic species. The goal is to end the legal commercial trade in body parts, heads, nails, skins, etc., being sold around the world in Asia and elsewhere. But that story took us to a place we didn't expect. And we owe it to our credibility to, one, emphasize that that wasn't the objective of the film. But in terms of integrity, we have to confront this reality. In this film and in this story, you will see a beloved international organization that sells plush toys to children of polar bears, that shows starving polar bears from the loss of sea ice, and talks about the threat and how only we can save them. If you send us money, we will do this in your name. But behind the scenes, of course, we discovered the same organization has been advocating for the continued hunting, shooting, and trade in this species. So that's where the rub begins, and that's where the challenge begins. We have been on calls together with very respected institutions, some of whom receive considerable funding from this organization, questioning our integrity. It's a hit job. The onus almost is flipping the dialogue that the bad characters in this are people who are exposing a beloved institution and calling for accountability. All we are saying is, let there be transparency. If you have a position, explain it. Don't hide it. Be upfront about it. I received a call just over a week ago from a very, very prominent individual Many of you, all of you, would know that individual's name. Expressing concern that by exposing this, you're potentially hurting a greater good. I believe the greater good is honesty and integrity. And as journalists, as writers, as investigative filmmakers, at the end of the day, all we have is our own credibility. We have to present the facts, give credit where credit is due, celebrate success, but call into question in honesty and ethically when we see wrongdoing. We don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We just say, you know what? Let's give this more thought. How do we get it right?
Thank you, Kostas. So many really great points. I want to bring the audience, just for the sake of time, into the conversation. Just raise your hand when you have a question. Yes. Excuse me. You're looking down, but you raised your hand first.
These are two obviously completely different films, and you guys alluded to the fact you haven't seen each other's film, but I found it ironic that it's a through line through here, and it's about exploitation. What of our resources, our most valuable resources, being our children, being the wildlife on the planet. So in that vein, how are our films, these investigative films that you guys are doing, are speaking to exploitation in a world that's built upon exploitation? I think that's the through line in history, is exploitation. So standing up to that, how do we move forward in addressing it? Because unfortunately, it seems to have been with us since the germs. So how do we deal with that?
Very good question. Who wants to go first?
I mean, I think Kostas said it quite well. I mean, transparency and actually just talking about it. So much of this is just hidden in the shadows. How can you possibly have reform and healing without knowing about it if things are suppressed? Again, it's hard to talk about the subject of our film without giving everything away, but it's not about burning, you stole my line, burning down the house. It's about we should be able to confront and challenge our biggest institutions, and only then can you sort of move forward and have sort of healing and reform and changes. But if you bury things and you don't talk them out, so a lot of it is just about putting it out into the court of public opinion. I mean, our film doesn't have a call to action telling people this is what you should do, because as much as I want this film to be a force for good, I think if the film if we put anything at the end of the film and said, now this is what you should do as the viewer, I think it would have undermined the integrity of the film from a sort of journalistic rigor point of view, because we did go into this film not knowing where it would lead us, what we'd uncover. And so in some ways it's different. I mean, that is different. There's things that you should just say, on certain topics, and other things it's a bit more grey, like Kostas says. Our topic, the topic of practice on how do we protect our most vulnerable species, there are differences of opinion. Some people believe that exploitation, which sustainable use, is a sort of euphemism in the sort of conservation world. If it pays, it stays. There are people who believe in that philosophy, that if you don't put an economic value on a species, then it won't be protected as well, because we are human beings and we interact with nature. That's a point of view. And if that's your philosophy, then I think you should be transparent in your messaging to the community, to the wider world. And if people believe in that and they want to support that, then they can. And other people who are more staunch on protection, that we just need to protect at all costs these animals, and we don't have sustainable use, then they can choose to funnel their support elsewhere. And I think that's really what it comes down to on our particular film. But all of this can't be sort of understood unless it's presented. And I loved what your question, Diana, earlier was about time. I had my own, if I'm being honest, my own biases and beliefs going into this story several years ago, and I learned so much through the journey of the film by just listening and waiting. So I think the film is much stronger for it, that we had time to sit with it, to meet so many people from different sides of the spectrum on this issue, and then present the film. So I think, time is a good thing if you've got the patience. And that's where documentary films are so important, because in our news cycle where things just have to be spat out quickly, we get out a story, maybe there's errors, maybe there's factual errors, but we've got to hit a deadline. When you have the the chance to live and breathe with a topic for sometimes many years, you can give it the depth of attention and rigor that it needs. And these big issues really deserve that time. So that's why I think documentary films should be here for a long, long time.
I'd like to just add a point that I think is relevant, and that is some years ago I got involved in another story which was trying to understand the illegal trade in elephant ivory. And as part of that investigative story, I again stumbled on another shocking fact with a colleague, which was that the Catholic Church was one of the world's largest traffickers in illegal ivory in the world. And I wrote about that and I published that. And it led to a huge blow up. I got a call from my editor saying the Vatican has responded directly. We're going to publish it. This is the Vatican, Kostas. We're going to publish this. You're going to, and I said, that's great, but I want a chance to comment on that. My inbox was flooded with accusations of you're taking an organization that's doing tremendous good in the world, Catholic Relief Services, feeding thousands of people, helping the poor, and you're damaging this. And so I won't walk you through all the details other than this point. In the course of 3 years, it took before the Catholic Church internally issued a statement, which I had called for in the article, that could end this kind of exploitation the next day. It took a period of years. There was a defensive response. You don't want to shame. You don't want to tear down. You want a solution. That's what's at the heart of this film as well. Sometimes you've got to, not sometimes you've got to be honest. You've always got to be honest and transparent. But don't lose sight of the solution. The solution was to stop the illegal trade in ivory. It wasn't to bring down the Catholic Church. And by keeping our eyes on what that solution is, in this case, by using integrity and using investigative journalism and adhering to the facts, the Catholic Church eventually took a stand and changed that position in a dramatic way.
Thank you, Kostas. And you had a question, yes?
I'm just interested in y'all's story. How did you two end up connecting, and what's the balance and the responsibilities between you two?
Go ahead.
We're mom friends. Our children went to school together, and we got to be friends. And in terms of balancing the responsibilities, Nora is the director. Nora is the driver of pretty much everything. And I see my role as supporting her, but where I'm not a traditional producer, I'm a first-time filmmaker. So I think where I played a role was in the story, and because these were very complex and very complicated ideas. And again, when you're being gaslit, there's a lot of just reminding each other that we're actually right. But, yeah.
Do you want to add anything to that?
No, she said it all.
How long did you know each other before, or did you know each other very well?
Yeah.
Yeah, we were good friends.
Thanks, you all. I appreciate you coming out. Thanks again to Double Exposure for the opportunity to share this work. And let's thank the panelists.
I'm just going to quickly throw in, we are, for those of you that will still be around, we are the closing night film. I realize that some folks have to head out, but if you are around, I hope you can make it. It's going to be really special. Ian Shapira from the Washington Post is going to be moderating, and our newly attached to the project executive producer, the actor and survivor himself, sadly, of a similar situation, Anthony Edwards, is going to be coming to town and participating in the Q&A. So hope to see you there. And thank you again, Double Exposure. Enormous honor.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Do you want to remind people when your screening is?
And Trade Secret is screening in the Bloomberg Theatre here tomorrow at 2 p.m. with Professor Guggenheim as moderator, Kostas, myself, and another special guest, which I won't mention, but will be there as well.
So where's the theater?
It's downstairs in the lobby, and they say that we timed the workshops to finish 10 minutes before, so no conflicts.
So everybody heard that the theater's downstairs in the lobby.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie.